African Americans were welcomed here during the Second World War. That's when San Francisco, Oakland opened to African Americans, as was the case in New York and Detroit and a number of other cities. And what we didn't realize then was that we were at the end of the job queue for industrial labor forces. And by the 1950s, these industries were starting to decline. So what happened was that the white working force that was ahead of African Americans, had more seniority, moved out of the cities with these industries. Blacks could not follow their white labor peers into the suburbs because of racial discrimination. There were covenants that kept African Americans from buying property in these new suburbs, and these properties were paid for by the federal government. The new home mortgage systems were all available to white working class people who took well advantage of it. They had the GI Bill as well, and they were able to move into the suburbs, create new communities in the suburbs closer to the new manufacturing centers, and in the process left African Americans behind in large cities without the industrial base to support the population. In East and West Oakland, you have one of the highest rates of home ownership in the country. Okay, so you had people who managed to invest and to get their properties and to establish well-established communities. Now, what happened when you have industry pulls out of a city and leaves a population there without the opportunity for work, you then have census tracts, actually blocks, in West and East Oakland that had 50% unemployment rates by 1960. It didn't improve by 70, 80, and 90. So what happened is you had a large portion of communities, not all, not everyone, but you had enough people in communities without any viable way of supporting themselves that they were then open to whatever way they could. The overlooked significance of the Panther Party is that they held back the drug tide. When they were operating, they would not allow drug dealers and drugs to become a new economy in East or West Oakland. We couldn't understand for years why are drugs confined to black communities? Because black people have less money than anyone else. So if you're going to make money on drugs, why would it be with the poorest community? Well, it wasn't because it was for black trafficking. It was a way of getting drugs out into suburban communities and then keeping the police heat and the whole identity of drugs on black communities and never seeing that it was going out. I was able to map primary drug, crack cocaine trafficking locations in East Oakland. And it turned out that all of them were within 5 blocks of freeway exits and entrances. Well, think about this. If you live in East and West Oakland, why was it necessary to stand on the street corner and sell drugs? If your primary traffic were people who live in the community, they don't need to stand on the street corner. You can do it from one another's homes, for that matter. I have actually tracked and mapped the extent to which drugs became predominant on various blocks in Harlem and in East Oakland. And at what point does that block no longer become livable? The untold story is that many of these blocks held out, they resisted, they in fact had a pitched war against these elements. And a number of them won, but then a number of them failed. And that is whenever a block gets to a point where it becomes uninhabitable or you no longer control it, you're out of there. So then what happens is that anyone who gets a good job in some of these blocks, first thing they do is, what do? They leave the community. You see the population softening from the 1970s to the 80s to the 90s. You start to see the population going down, down, down. And we didn't call it gentrification then, but it was going down. And when it got low enough, when basically the social backbone of the community was broken and in effect was wiped out, then it created these spaces, in effect whole blocks of buildings where their value was so low that anyone with any imagination would say, well, my God, why should I pay $600,000 or $700,000 to live out in the suburbs when I can buy a old Victorian in West Oakland or in San Francisco for $150,000, $200,000. One of the things we don't look at in gentrification is that the black people and poor people who are being displaced from the city don't disappear. They don't fall off the face of the earth or it didn't get gobbled up or something. Question is, where do they go? And it's very clear. They're going way, 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 way out. Fresno, Tracy, Stockton, and Antioch, Pittsburgh, Hercules, Vallejo. Same for New York. They're being pushed way out in New Jersey, into the Oranges, up to Rockland County, up to Westchester County, out onto the island, and so forth. So, they're there. So what we're seeing is the displacement of people from the inner city, but now the formation of, if you will, new ghettos in the suburban communities.